right, hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and I'm actually going to be posting this up as sort of a bonus episode. I wasn't actually in this episode at all. It was actually an SNS show, but Marvin Wallace, who's been on our show a few times now, debated the atheist David Johnson on the issue of morality and the moral argument for God, and looking at the field of ethics and that sort of thing. And he reached out to me by email and asked me if I would be kind enough to host the recording on my website for people as well. And of course, I'm happy to have my fellow Christian brother Marvin's show up here. He's a great debater and a great guy. So yeah, without any further ado, enjoy the show between my two friends, the atheist David Johnson and the Christian Marvin Wallace, on the issue of morality. Okay, take care.
Have actually heard you speak on the mic and may not even know who you are when it comes to the board. And so just introduce yourself a little bit and let people know who you are, maybe a little bit about your Christian journey, whatever you'd like people to know.
Thanks, David. I originally come from a city called Derby in the UK, well, in England. It's right in the middle, a place called the Midlands, and it's in the middle of the Midlands. I stayed in England for about the first half of my life, and then migrated to Hong Kong. So I'm now speaking out of Hong Kong. I studied an art degree when I was in the UK, but I've since sort of gone a different route because I began teaching English in Asia, and sort of pursued avenues that enabled me to do that more effectively. One thing that I did do was do Viola's MA in apologetics, which I found was just loads of fun, very interesting, and perhaps one of the reasons why I tend to speak the way that I do and have the confidence that I might come across as having in some of the arguments that I make sometimes. I have two teenage children and a lovely wife, and I'm enjoying life here in Hong Kong. Thanks, David.
Sure, and thank you for sharing that. Today we're going to be talking about morality. I don't want to call it the moral argument per se, because that has a particular shape to it, although I do want to start the conversation there. But I think that we'll be talking about a wide ranging aspects of morality. This podcast will not go for 5 hours. It may not go much more than 1 or 1.5 hours. I know that it will be an insufficient amount of time for this topic, but I've already started floating the idea of doing a second show on this topic with Marvin and maybe another Christian and a couple of skeptics, so that we can have a similar roundtable topic and just open up, depending on some of the cans of worms that we open here today and not be able to fully deal with. And so that said, I'd like to get the conversation started in a kind of an easy way. The classical moral argument, and Marvin, since you are the one here with an apologetics degree, why don't you begin the conversation by just telling us what we normally would hear with the classical presentation of the moral argument.
Okay, the classical presentation of the moral argument, or particularly the moral argument that is made famous by Bill Craig in his cumulative case for Christian theism, is as follows. If God does not exist, objective morals, values, and duties do not exist. Moral objective values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. So what Craig is arguing there is, in the absence of God, then there wouldn't be objective moral values and duties. But since we do have them, that points very strongly to the moral lawgiver, or the moral intuitor. that's the way that argument runs, David.
Sure. Is there, can you maybe think of a way that there could be some type of objective moral law without a God? I mean, it seems like the key part of this argument, as it's stated, is that God equals objective morality. And I'm just thinking, well, there's a way that we can think of stars existing without a God. Um, and maybe this thing that you think of as objective morality might just be a feature of the natural universe where people are in it. And so, can that work?
In a nutshell, I just don't think it can. I think it's just nigh on impossible. I can't think of a way that you can ground objective moral values in the natural world, because it doesn't seem to me to be the kind of thing that can be in the natural world.
Would you say emotions are a part of the natural world?
I would say that yeah, emotions are part of the natural world insofar as that people have emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But if the people who have emotions, or the emotions that they have is part of the natural world, is a different question. I think that sort of predicates persons as being completely natural. By that it means completely physical, and I wouldn't grant that, because I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that people are completely physical. So if what you mean by the natural world is everything that obeys the laws of physics, then I would say, the laws of physics and chemical combination, or a materialistic universe, then I would say no, because I think people are not completely physical.
That's fair enough, but I think the difference is you can understand an argument where someone would say, no, I think that people are completely physical and emotions is a part of human biology, and it can be explained. Now, I'm not suggesting that you would agree with that argument,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that you that you could see that someone could make that argument from an atheist perspective, and that not be crazy. And so the only thing I'm trying to establish is that there are many features of the human psyche that we could ground in the natural world, and we can have that debate. And I'm just wondering if our deep preferences for certain things and revulsions for certain things are not as natural as our emotions. Now, this is not the argument that I'm making. I'm just saying that I think it seems like a reach for Bill Craig to say the only thing that can explain, say, moral intuition, even if you say that that's subjective somehow, is a God, when there are things objectively about our emotions that we could say are natural. And so I think that there are
Okay.
other things about the human psyche that are also natural.
Okay. So I don't think Bill Craig would say it's the only thing that can explain objective morality. I think there have been attempts to explain objective morality, or objective facts, moral objective facts, whichever way you want to cash it out. But I do think that theism is far and away the best explanation, and I just think it's quite difficult to try to explain objective moral facts aside from theism. Do
Okay.
you hold that there are moral objective facts?
No,
Okay.
no. I know that that is a kind of a shocking thing to hear for some people, but I actually don't believe that there are such thing as moral objective facts. But to help maybe explore that a little bit, before we get too far here, I want to also just talk about what it is we think morality is before we talk about what it's based in. And so I was listening in preparation for this a debate between cosmic skeptic and Frank Turin, I think his name. And Turek, that's it.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah.
And Frank, this was on Unbelievable, by the way, and so
Yeah.
people had easy access to that.
I
Turek,
remember that one. Yeah.
yeah. Turek was saying toward the beginning that when we talk about good, what we're talking about is the nature of God, and I think that's a very strong statement, maybe even a stronger statement than Bill Craig's statement that there can be no concept of objective morality without God. I do not define goodness that way. I do not define goodness as the nature of God. I mean, you might say that if there is a God, he might be good, but I think atheists have no problem using a term like good or morality without regard to a God. And so I wanted to spend just a few moments before going further, maybe trying to define what we mean when we talk about good, and maybe we can come up with a definition that we can at least mutually use for this conversation, even if it's not completely satisfying to either one of us.
So what is so the question to me is, how do I define good? Or is it to respond to Frank Turek's?
Well, yeah, it's a little open-ended.
Good.
So, how do you define good? Do you associate goodness with morality? So, I mean, is that synonymous? So that
Yeah, I definitely think that goodness is the aim of morality, and I think what Turek was saying in that debate, I can't quite remember specifically what he says, but an ethical philosopher, Dave Badgett, put the point like this: good is grounded in the nature of God. Now, how is that grounded in the nature of God? I think he put the point that is best seen in the Trinity, which is an eternal communion, relationship, loving and perfect relationship between three aspects of one substance, and that's the grounding of goodness for theists like Dave Badgett, and I think like Frank Turek as well. I think I'll leave it trying to second guess Turek's grounding, but I would put it like that. Yourself, how would you ground goodness?
Well, before grounding it, I would just define it, and my definition is not very philosophical. So I think that I am probably more along the lines of the average Joe. We don't really think about goodness in philosophical terms, certainly not deeply philosophical terms. And so for me, goodness, let me just say morality or ethics, I do consider those two things synonymous, is doing the right thing in any given situation. So then we have a matter of, well, what is the right thing? But I think that however you cash out the right thing, that is also the good. It may not always be the pleasant. So I don't associate the good with the pleasant, although I think largely if you are doing the good all the time and your life is unpleasant, there's a disconnect. Something is wrong. If you're doing the good and society is unpleasant, there's something wrong. So the other way I would talk about the good is social social benefit or a pro-social behavior, versus bad, which is antisocial behavior or social harm. So I do believe that things like good and in particular morality, and this may be one of the places where I would differentiate between good and morals. Morality is a matter of human interactions. It would be a meaningless concept if there was only one person in the universe. There would be no such thing as morality. There's nothing that that person could do that would be immoral, because it would have no social effect at all, no effect on anyone else. Now, you could argue subjectively whether they are doing something that's good or bad for themselves, but that is merely speaking how they relate to themselves. You could not speak of it in terms of ethics, though. And so I think the right thing to do has to be combined with the social benefit, pro-social behavior. It has to involve some other human being. Otherwise, it just wouldn't make sense to speak in those terms. It would make sense to speak in terms of love, if there was no one there but yourself. I mean, you can talk about self-love, but that's not love the way we generally think about it. And so these are just kind of some thoughts that I have about what is good, and I don't think any of that's very deeply philosophical. It's all, in fact,
But
pretty
it makes
intuitive, I think.
it makes sense. If I might move on
Hmm.
and just flesh out what I'm thinking a little bit. Okay, so I think that much of what you said makes sense and is not too dissimilar to what I hold to. Aside from the fact that I try to ground the theist like myself tries to ground good in an example of what goodness is, which we believe to be exemplified in the Trinity. So that is an example of what good is. Now you laid out as well what a moral life is to you, and I think that that's pretty good. I would say that a moral life is, and I tend to go towards a virtue type of ethics is a life lived skillfully. A life lived skillfully pertaining to do what is good. And what is good is what is good for a human to do as an individual, what is good for a human to do in society, what is good for a human to do in their daily lives. So it's being skillful with relationships, being a worthwhile, upstanding member of communities. It's having a sense of excellence and skill in whatever job you do. So it's a whole plethora of things that add towards that pertain towards being skillful or virtuous in life. And I think following Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, I think both of them kind of argued, by the way, that we can only kind of really judge the virtuous person at the end of their lives. We can't judge them at the beginning or in the middle. We have to look and say, how have they grown and how have they used what they have to live a good life. So I would flesh out my moral theory based on pertaining to what is good like that. So I think there's quite a bit of overlap.
Okay, yes, I see the overlap. I see the potential for some of the places where we might diverge a little bit too. So let's explore some of those places where we might go in different routes. You asked the question before, and I just wanted to get this definitionally out there before tackling it. What do I ground goodness in? And this is the question where the moral argument debate kind of goes naturally with a Christian and a non-Christian. You might say, for instance, that goodness is grounded in the nature of God. And I will surprise you here by saying I could grant that argument entirely, and it still would not help.
Hmm.
It wouldn't get us very far, because I'm not actually interested in proving or disproving a God. I think the only thing that the moral argument is designed to do is it's kind of an apologetic as a proof for God. It actually doesn't say much about morality. And so if I granted what I think is a fairly trivial aspect of the moral argument and just said for the sake of argument, okay, there's a God and his nature is good, uh, we don't actually get anywhere. And that doesn't help us decide what the right thing to do is in any given situation. So I try to ground my ideas of good. And once again, just to understand, I'm not really deeply philosophical about this. This is only when I have to force myself to think about it. I don't think anyone is all that deeply philosophical and ask themselves, well, what is the foundation of good? I think that's a fairly unnatural question for most people. But for me, I would say that the foundation of good is in societal, individual, and societal flourishing. Now, you might call this the Harris Doctrine, but I don't think that Harris was the first person to decide that humans flourishing is a good thing, right?
Hmm.
This is not a particularly high-end idea. It's fairly intuitive, and so I do believe that that is a good starting point. And if we can say that this thing or set of things uh, either A, benefits flourishing or has uh, no effect on it one way or the other, I would put that in the category of the good, or at least certainly not the bad. And I would only think of a thing as bad if it does have some harmful effect uh, socially, or I would say individually. But as we talk about knowing the right thing to do in any given situation, I'm mostly not concerned with the individual here.
Hmm.
And I'll talk about why in a little bit. I think that individuals can do a lot of bad things to themselves. That is simply not my ultimate concern. If a person can do bad things that don't affect other people, I'm actually fine with that. I would
Okay.
like everyone to do good things. I don't think that that person is experiencing ultimate flourishing. But if they believe that they're doing okay and they're doing something that I consider bad, but it doesn't actually affect anyone, it's just not something that I'm interested in considering in the scope of a conversation on ultimate morality. And I know that the Christian would think differently because your idea of morality probably has something to do with sin and how, what the you know, good is good whether someone else is involved or not, sort of thing. So that's where my grounding is. Tell me about your grounding.
That's great. I mean, I sort of understand that you sort of have a parallel argument to Sam Harris there. I think he talks about human flourishing. He, if I remember correctly, it's on a footnote to page 48, I think, of the Moral Landscape.
I listened to it
Uh,
in audio. I
yeah,
have no idea.
he talks about human flourishing and well-being, and he admits that he derives those terms from the Greek term eudaimonia. Okay, so eudaimonia, the good life, can be translated as flourishing or else as well-being. So it comes from Aristotle, and given Aristotle's a virtue ethicist, I can understand what what Aristotle means when he talks about human flourishing and well-being, because he talks about what I mentioned previously, a well-lived life.
I use that
Yeah.
phrase a lot myself.
So I can get that it's a well-lived life, but I think Harris doesn't talk about it in in terms of being a well-lived life. So would you go beyond what Harris is saying here and sort of go for the Aristotelian, perhaps the Thomistic understanding of eudaimonia, which is a well-lived life?
I think I could, but I don't think I would try to make that case on air.
Yeah.
So,
Basically, what I'm saying is Harris uses the term in not the right way, right?
well, he uses the
I think
term in, I think,
I think
a very colloquial way, and
I
so
mean, Alistair McIntyre, right? A moral historian, sort of bemoans using terms in a way that divulges them or empties them of meaning, because then we end up with sort of according to him, a fractured moral conversation. And I think that is what happens when Harris uses well-being and human flourishing, aside from its usual grounding, which is in virtue ethics. So what I'm saying is that, and this is where the overlap is. It lines up well with someone like myself who sort of pertains towards virtue ethics, but for the non-Christian, how does that work? What is human flourishing?
yeah. So let me just say, I am not a virtue ethicist.
Okay.
I'm not an ethicist, so I'm not a moral philosopher. But
Yeah,
if I
I'm just
were,
yeah. Sorry, David.
yeah, no, that's okay. If I were, I would not be a virtue ethicist. I don't believe. I don't think that Sam Harris is a virtue ethicist, and so I don't want to be in the position of
Sure.
arguing Sam
It's like
Harris any more than you want to be in a position of defending Turek. But I would say that my understanding of Harris is that he is not shooting for so much the virtue ethics that you're talking about, but that may be a starting point. When he talks about flourishing or a well-lived life, in fact, he doesn't really use the term well. He talks about well-being and
mhm,
flourishing. He is really talking about the opposite of misery, and he defines his position fairly well. And I like to define it that way myself. If you imagine I think, just trying to find an agreement on a starting point. If you can imagine all humans suffering the worst possible suffering, the worst possible misery all the time, we could both agree that that is a less than ideal condition. Now, how do we improve that condition? By just changing even one of those things. Maybe uh, all people suffering absolute misery only part of the time. And then we can make it better by saying, well, only some people suffer absolute misery some of the time. And we can make it even better by saying very people suffer some misery part of the time. And we can continue to progress that until we get to the point where no people are in misery any of the time. And so you can talk about that as a utopic
mhm.
vision, if you will. That's certainly not what we have now, but it is the goal, I think, of the natural goal of humans for themselves and their family to live in the most well-being state that they can as much of the time as possible. And so if you just expand that and extend that desire from yourself and your family to other people around you, to greater society, you have what and I think what Sam Harris is talking about as well-being and flourishing. So I think that's a very simple idea that falls well short of the what was the word, eudaimonia,
Eudaimonia. Yeah.
eudaimonia.
Well,
I don't.
I get
I think
that.
it falls short of that, but I think that's what we're getting at.
If I could respond, I get that, and I think what I'm saying is given maximizing pleasure and minimizing suffering, which is basically, you might call it consequentialism. Sam Harris himself calls it consequentialism, because the idea is to get a set of principle or rules that govern human behavior, the outcome of which would be the maximizing of pleasure and the minimization of pain. And he talks about, using science to do that. I get that, but the point that I'm trying to make is that's not what you end up with, is not human flourishing or well-being, eudaimonia, because that's a value-laden concept that Harris doesn't flesh out. So what you get, I think, is a sort of a hedonistic utilitarianism, which is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And I can agree, and there's overlap here, that those things are good, but we have to say there's actually more to life than pain and pleasure. There are other things that we need to take into account, such as truth, experience, reality. These things all feed into what it is to live a moral life. And let me throw this out there as well. It was previously, you mentioned one person on their own, in your view, could not live a moral life. I'm thinking of a Thomistic moral philosopher. His name will come, Ralph McInerny. He made this point: all human action is moral action, because everything you do, or everything a human do, is done towards a specific aim, whether that aim be good or bad. And therefore, all moral action is, or all human action is moral action. Now, not every Christian is going to buy that, but I think he makes a good point.
Right. So let me just go back to what you said about utilitarian hedonism.
Yeah.
Or hedonistic utilitarianism.
Yeah.
So this is not something that I've ever done before, but why not? We're having a conversation. No one can lose here, right?
It's a conversation.
Let me make a case for hedonistic utilitarianism. So,
yeah.
I'm not a hedonist, by the way, in the sense that you talk about. I'm certainly not a moral utilitarian. But that said, if you could achieve hedonistic utilitarianism for everyone in society at the same time, then I think that would be a goal. In other words, if everyone could have ultimate pleasure all the time, even at the expense of ultimate truth, I'm not sure that would be a bad thing. So an example of this for Star Trek fans, there was this fan favorite episode, The Spores, and the crew comes to this planet. Apparently some people from another ship had gotten stranded there, and turns out they could live forever. They were healthy, they had no diseases, they were happy, they were flourishing, they were one with nature. It was paradise, except it was a paradise created by this artificial thing. It was kind of a parasitic plant life, these spores that caused them. And Kirk couldn't countenance that. He needed his reality, damn it. And so he destroyed their paradise so that they could have a dose of reality. And I'm not sure that he did the right thing. Those people were living the thing that is the human goal. And you can say, well, but they didn't get there the right way. But I'm not sure that the right way really matters in this case. So this is just a kind of a science fiction view of this idea of hedonistic utilitarianism. So this is not something that I think is actually possible in this world, that we could achieve this type of hedonistic utilitarianism without some nod to reality and truth. But if you could, I don't think I would be against that, because it would still achieve the end that everyone is maximally flourishing.
If I might come back to that, When you say maximally flourishing, do you mean that they're living lives sort of with the maximum of pleasure and the minimum of suffering?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I would say that that's not flourishing. Here, consider this. The experience machine is a super duper contraption. It is able to supply its subjects with any experience they desire. Scientists would so configure the machine that the individual would be wired into the machine yet floating in a medium. The medium could, for example, allow the individual to think that they are writing a great novel or else making a new friend. The machine can be programmed so that the individual could stay in it for life. Alternatively, the individual could come out every so often so as to change the experiences they have. The important point is that the machine can be so configured that the individual will not know that they are not in the machine. Robert Nowacki, the one who formulated this, Nozick, sorry, who formulated this thought experiments, then posits this question. Would you plug into that machine, which is analogous to the Star Trek series you talked about or episode you talk about? Would you plug into that?
I'm surfing the web right now to see if this machine exists. Sign me up. Sign
Many,
me up.
many people wouldn't. Why? He goes to point out that what we want are actual experiences. What would it mean to have had the perfect experience of climbing Mount Everest, yet not to have ever actually climbed Mount Everest in reality? A second reason is that we want to be a certain way. One might say that we want to be the best examples of ourselves given our biological makeup. To choose to be living in a machine as an indeterminate blob is to opt for a kind of suicide. A third reason is that to accept the life in the experience machine is to limit oneself to man's reality. The point that I'm trying to get at here is that aside from maximizing pleasure and minimizing suffering, there's a whole plethora of experience and comporting with reality, having real future, having real options, being in control of one's destiny, being able to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. There's a whole dimension of things that go on that constitute what it is to live a life that can be virtuous and can result in the moral life. Just having pleasure and minimizing pain, I don't think captures that sphere. And I think that that is something that is missing with the explication of the kind of the consequentialism that Harris promotes in The Moral Landscape.
Yeah, but shouldn't that be an individual choice? I mean, when you describe the experience machine, and
Yeah.
even when you give it in its most negative terms, I still say sign me up. I've had 5, maybe 6 major surgeries
Mhm.
in my life. My life would be materially better if I had not had to go through that. If my life and my body had not gone in such a way that necessitated that. And if you could have told me about this experience machine before getting into a position where those surgeries were required, I would go for the experience machine. I'm perfectly happy with that. I can't remember in the
Okay.
Matrix which one the red pill and the blue pill is, but the pill that allows me to have my happy dream for my existence, uh, I'll take that one every time.
Hmm.
I am not I'm not the guy who's got to free everybody from the machine.
Well, I mean, great point. I've had this conversation with our resident idealists, and I'm not going to mention names. I never like to really mention names,
Oh,
and
Tara knows who you're talking about, for Pete's sake.
unless it's positive. And the idea the idea that I'm trying to get across to her is that, look, if life is this sort of huge illusion, and it's not, what we perceive it to be, isn't that immoral? Isn't that a lie?
No, it's not a lie unless someone is purposely deceiving you. So it would just be a misapprehension of reality. But I don't, now, I also like knowing things about reality. One of the reasons I like knowing things about reality is because I'm stuck in it. If
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't stuck in it, then I would like to know, things about the other options that I have besides reality. So I am a big fan of keeping it real because reality is all we've got up until the point that someone invents the experience machine.
Which is my
And,
point.
and I'm willing to dump reality like
Which
a
is my
bad habit at that point.
which is my point. If reality is what it is, and what we think it is not what it is, then something's awry.
Well, no, it just means that we don't know everything about reality and nature and the universe. And I don't think that anyone who ever exists ever will. And so we will always have some misapprehensions about reality. So,
Okay, I take
please
I
please
take
don't
that.
take this the wrong way. I think
No,
that
no, no, no.
Christianity,
I
people in religions, I think that they are in their own experience machine. I don't think that they are living the fullness of reality. You can say Muslims, Hindus, uh, practitioners of voodoo. They're not living the greatest reality, the greatest life, because they're in a kind of an experience machine that doesn't work very well. And so they don't have the best of the experience machine and they don't have the best of reality. And so that's where I think it's a real tragedy. But we all, I mean, you would say the same thing about me. You would say that that my life is an illusion because I am living it thinking that there is no God and no higher power. And really, there's this whole other substrate that I'm not aware of. And so I'm not entirely sure how that's different from living in an experience machine and just being deceived about other parts of
well,
the
yeah, I'm not gonna. I wouldn't say your life is an illusion. I think your life is a real life lived in a real universe, on a real planet, and then and I think that you experience life as do I. And I think that our faculties are the kind of faculties that allow us to experience life the right way. For example, we have eyes that look. We have sensory apparatus such as eyes that look into the real world or the physical world, deliver us information about that real world that we can make make judgments about. Same with our ears, same with our tactile sensations, and minds that are constituted in such a way that they work well within the environment in which they are specifically designed, in my view, to work. So I think we're both the same in that way. Now, why you're not a Christian and I am, I think I wouldn't judge you on that. I would just give you what I think are the facts, and then only you know.
All right, but you would agree that at least one of us, maybe both of us, but at least one of us is radically wrong about the nature of reality.
I think one of us is. I think one of us is wrong about ultimate reality, but not reality itself. And the reason I say ultimate reality is because going back to what I first said in the beginning is I don't think that the natural world, the physical world, is all there is. I think there's an immaterial aspect to the world, and that's what I was getting at before. So it's not that you're wrong about reality, it's perhaps that you don't encompass that there could be more beyond this physical experience that we have.
So tell me what you think the end game is. I mean, in a sense, we both have a utopic end game in mind.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that, for instance, your end game has something to do with heaven. I don't actually know what your views are about heaven. I haven't surveyed it. I'm just taking a guess because you're a Christian. This is vaguely a Christian notion. I know there are lots of different opinions. But the idea that heaven is some kind of ultimate state where you live for an ultimate lifespan and you have the ultimate good all the time, and
Yeah,
you have, if I can say, all pleasure
yeah,
and no misery.
yeah,
That is the same. That is exactly the same in game for me.
yeah.
Now, I wouldn't call it heaven, and I don't think I don't think that exists. But to the extent that if we can increase human lifespan, let's say there is a way that we could increase it for
Okay.
infinity. I'm for that. But we are both. It seems like hope. We think that ultimate good, that the thing that we are going for, that we want humans to go toward, and what we consider the goal of morality, is this utopia. Am I wrong?
The end, as you put it, the end goal, I would say, yeah, that's a good end goal. And I agree.
Okay. So what we think that end goal is, even though we have some agreement roughly, if you think that end goal is something that is awarded to us by a being not of this world, and awarded to some and not to others, and I think this end goal is something that we can create ourselves, we're going to have some radically different ideas, I think, about how to achieve that goal. So I want to see if I can transition the conversation to some of that difficulty. Because even I said something that people probably are still reeling at right now. I could grant the God argument.
Hmm.
And I think I would like to spend a few minutes doing that just
Can I
to.
throw? Can I just give ask one thought?
Sure.
So, in a way, I suppose this is academic because you don't really hold that we do have objective morals, right? You don't think that there
No,
are objective moral facts. Is that right?
that's correct.
Okay. So, for example, the example that's always given, it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Would you say that that is always wrong, or is that objectively wrong or subjectively wrong?
Well, it's definitely
Is it wrong?
subjectively. It's
Is
it's
it wrong?
subjectively wrong. It's wrong to me, and I know why I think it's wrong.
Mhm. But
But I
that's
don't know why a Christian would think it's wrong. Because if they have a very different idea of what the end goal is and how that's achieved, their reason for that being wrong is going to be different than my reason for it being wrong. So this is kind of what I want to get at. Even if I were
what
to
what
go to
what what I want to throw out there is that for the Christian it's just wrong. It's always wrong. But for you, it's not always wrong. It's just wrong for you.
well, right. So I want to explore that. So let me just
I'm just gonna throw something else out there for you as well. How do we come to know what is wrong? Is
right. So
that
this is
is
this
that
is the
yeah?
question that I'm trying to shape right now. And so
Okay.
no matter what you think the grounding is, which is why I can go ahead and grant God for a few minutes just for the sake of fun, it does not help us answer the question of what is right or wrong in any given situation. And I contend that we have to move past the God question if we're going to actually find useful answers to those questions. The moral argument does not help you with that. And grounding morality in some deeply philosophical concept of the goodness of God does not, in fact, help you know whether torturing babies for fun is wrong or not. So, with that said, let's go ahead and run with that example. I think both you and I would find the idea of torturing babies for fun, in fact, forget for fun, torturing babies, a distasteful, a disgusting idea. But once again, we come at it from two very different places, and I'm not sure that we agree on why we think it's wrong. Furthermore, I think what you're trying to do when you make an argument that way, and it's not like you're the first person who's used this as an argument. I hear this all the time. When the Christian tries to use this type of example, what they are trying to do is identify something that is universally considered wrong by all people at all times. And I would say that you have failed to do that with that example. Obviously, you have failed because people throughout history have found reasons, what they thought were good reasons, to torture babies. One example that I would give would be the practice of taking babies and putting them in holes, and then putting columns in those holes and building temples around that. Live babies. That is torturing babies in the ultimate way, in the service of their God ideas. And so there have been plenty of people throughout history who have not only thought that it was okay to do so, but have thought it was okay to do so firmly with the idea that it was in service to a God. So it does, you have failed to find a thing that is
Okay,
universal.
I appreciate your response. Okay, so I think you're right in many ways, but let me flesh that out a bit.
Sure.
I think that we have moral intuitions, and those are the things that unify moral discourse, moral thought, and that's not just Christians who hold to moral intuitionism or moral objective facts based on intuitions. It's a lot of it, atheist philosophers or thinkers on ethics too. Now, when you talk about the example of a society who kill babies for their deity or whatever they do, we need to examine the facts of the case, because I think it's the facts of the case that determine how the moral is played out, which is to say, I would bet, and I can't just guess the example that you've given because I don't know the society from which that comes, but I would guess right here that what that society will say is that it's wrong to murder your own children, and that's the moral intuition. So we all agree that murdering your own children is wrong, but that those babies who are sacrificed for the temple, as it were, I think what we'll probably find out is that those babies are not their own, or they come from another tribe or another group. For example, as the Aztecs did when they cut out the hearts of people to appease their god, to stop him destroying the world. They'd cut out people's hearts to sacrifice. So my point is that I think that the moral intuition is the same. It's the facts of the case that determine the moral intuition that are different. So you have to examine those facts to see if the moral intuition, the objective moral fact, is being adhered to.
Yeah, so as I would view morals, the facts at that resolution don't matter, because I would not say that it is wrong to murder your children. I would say it's wrong to murder any children because that doesn't that once again we can talk about why I say that's wrong, but it reduces flourishing. It causes a definite societal harm, even if it's only the society of the person that you're harming or the family of the people that you're harming. Yeah, so it is definitely the opposite of pro-social behavior. Now, that may not be a good enough reason.
So we agree that they're wrong. Yeah.
Well, but let me just be clear. That may not be a good enough reason for you. You believe that the facts of the case of whether or not they're murdering their children or someone else's children matter, and I don't believe that. I don't believe that matters at all. And I would actually be concerned about the moral intuition if we're talking about a specific case of this. By the way, this is not made up. This is history. But if we're talking about a specific case of this, and you ask the question, okay, but was it your child? I don't care about the answer. I would worry about your moral intuition that you would care about the answer to that question.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I'm tracking with you here. My point is that yeah, it's wrong. It's wrong. We have moral intuitions about what is right and wrong. To
But
kill,
I don't get this from a moral intuition, though. I mean, I think that we can talk about moral intuition. I think that is definitely
you don't
on
get
the list. But this
you
is
don't
this is
you don't get that it's wrong to kill children from moral intuition.
no. I'm not saying that you don't get it from moral intuition. I'm saying as I have set this up,
Mhm.
I haven't even addressed moral intuition yet. It's wrong on another level besides moral intuition. It's wrong in that it is anti-social, socially harmful behavior. That is why I would say first and foremost that it's wrong. A secondary reason is moral intuition, and then we can talk about, well, how did we get this moral intuition that I'm talking about? In other words, our social conscience, if you will.
Mhm.
So first of all, it's important to note that moral intuition and social conscience are not universal. We have different intuitions and consciences about different things, but by and large,
That's where we disagree, right? Because I think largely our moral intuitions are the same, and I would say that those who don't have the same are kind of twisted, wrong, right? They're wrong.
well,
But
okay, but
you wouldn't say that. You wouldn't say that
no,
society.
not simply based on moral intuition.
You wouldn't say that the society who sort of destroyed their kids in the way you pointed out are wrong. In fact, you'd probably say you'd be in the position to say, well, they were right given their understanding.
No. I would say that they're wrong, but I would say that they're wrong because of the reasons that I gave.
What
They're
and
not wrong because
the reason being social cohesion or something like that.
because of a breakdown of social cohesion. And
But
I just
if they were the big tribe in say South America, and they did that to the smaller tribes, and it caused social cohesion in their big tribe, then wouldn't they be right to do it, given what you've just said?
no, because my ethic is not just about an individual or even an individual tribe.
Hmm.
It is about everyone to the extent possible. And I think this is where the Harris doctrine kind of comes in.
So if
It's
that
not necessarily
okay, allow me to throw
concerned
this.
with the
So
tribe.
if the majority of people thought that, then they would be right according to Harris's doctrine.
No, they would. I think that they
They
would be
would.
demonstrably no. They would be
I think
demonstrably
they
wrong.
would. I think they
No,
would. This
they
is the
would not.
problem.
Harris's doctrine. This is, again, I don't want to find myself defending Harris. Harris bases his part of his doctrine on the science or the scientific method of determining what, in fact, is flourishing and well-being for humans. And so I think that we can say with a high level of agreement throughout the audience that societies that kill their kids, that there is not a surer and shorter path to um, evolutionary disaster. Extinction lies at the brink for that society. And so
But
there are,
let me stop you there a second. But science cannot tell us what human flourishing is, can it?
but it can tell us, I think, once we determine what human flourishing is,
Bingo.
what what things
Bingo. And
what
that's the
things bring
point
us
that I'm
toward
making.
it and what things move us away from it.
Okay.
And I think that
That's
there are
exactly the point that I make. If you
right.
determine what it is before you do the science, you know what the science can tell you. If you know what good is before you sort of collect the data, then you know, right, science can tell you what good is, but you can't do the science and then say, well, science has showed us this is good unless you've determined beforehand what good is.
Well,
That's the problem.
that's why you have
That's
to have a goal. The
that's the
science
that's
doesn't
the
give us a goal.
that's the problem with Harris's doctrine.
Well, I think that it is incomplete in that sense, and I think that Harris would
Okay.
be the first to say that we have to first agree on a goal. And he simply suggests as a goal human flourishing in a very, I think, intuitive
In a
manner.
very in a very narrow sense that doesn't really do justice to what human flourishing is,
Well,
because
but
the
once
human
again, I think
flourishing.
that we can say from a scientific or evolutionary way that a civilization that routinely kills their children is not a civilization that can survive. There are no civilizations right now that survive with that as an ethic, and so we can kind of rule that out.
Hold on, David. You're not taking into account the abortion debate here, are you?
Uh, Not in the way that you do, but I
And
would.
that's exactly an example of intuition, right? You gave compare that with the example that you gave earlier. Now, you and I would agree that killing children is wrong. Would you agree that killing children is wrong?
For the reasons I gave, yes.
But 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 the facts are
Not in some objective way, but
but
because
the
it goes against all human goals of flourishing.
but the point that I want to make is that we both agree that killing children is wrong. But you wouldn't agree that fetuses are children.
Right?
And I would say, well, they have the potential to become children. So the
Sure.
moral intuition is the same. How we interpret those facts is different, as in the example that you gave. How we interpret those facts is different.
Right. Well, I think, yeah, there is definitely a different interpretation of facts. But if you just once again take the view seriously that I'm offering,
I'm trying to, yeah,
abortion. Right, I believe you.
yeah,
So, I, for anyone listening, this is a conversation in good faith. Okay, we're going to disagree. This is
yeah, no problem.
disagreement's not bad. But abortion, it has not, in fact, been shown to be a thing that diminishes society. Like, for instance, if you killed all girls under 3, you would simply not be able to procreate. Right? You wouldn't be able to flourish.
Mhm.
If you abort fetuses, but your society is still producing uh, more than enough children to maintain your society, such as China, for instance, which I think has a fairly abhorrent abortion policy, no matter what else I think about abortion. I think that China has some real problems there, but their abortion policy does not seem, and I'm open to counter examples here, but it does not seem to be the thing that is harming their society. They're able to produce plenty of people to have children and procreate, and even grow their society. And that's a society that would probably be healthier if it was smaller, rather than larger. So I don't see your argument of abortion in terms of this moral framework that I'm posing. So yes, we disagree on the facts, but we also disagree that it's wrong on my framework, because I don't think that it is in fact harming their society. If anything, uh, it if they had a slightly different way of
So is your
instantiating their
point
policy, it might actually be beneficial.
is your point sort of only things that harm society are wrong?
Those are the only types of wrongs that I am generally concerned with. So, and when I say society, I don't always mean all people all the time. It could be a society of two people. Morality is a matter of relationship, and so it doesn't have to be a big relationship. But I am mostly concerned about society of all humans when the conversation can be expanded to that scope.
Uh-huh.
Because I'm interested in the flourishing of all humans. For instance, I do not believe that we have achieved our goal at all if
Uh-huh.
we have one small society that achieves utopia.
Mhm.
We have not achieved our goal. We might look and see what they have
I
done,
agree.
but I suspect they've
Mhm.
done a lot of antisocial things that harm other people to achieve it.
I agree with you that those things that are good for societies are morally correct, given what that given 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 what that good is or what that thing is. But I do think that you can there could be a society that's set up even globally that does things, or when I look at Nazi Germany, their society was doing things that was evil, even though it benefited the mass majority. And you could
No,
make
I don't.
you
I disagree with that. Just
you could make
historically.
you could make that argument again on the global scale as it is now. The vast majority could have the moral sort of precepts carved in stone and put into law to suit them, but that wouldn't really be. It might benefit everybody in some way, but it wouldn't necessarily be the right thing.
But I don't.
An example I could give could be the subjugation of women. I think that would be wrong, even if, for example, just over half of the world's population thought that was something that we should do.
Right, but it would be wrong. It would not benefit everybody, as you say. It would, it
It
would
would benefit
at
most people.
most benefit only half the people. And I assure you, subjugating women over a long period of time doesn't even benefit that half. And this
Well,
is this is where I would.
well, here's the thing, right? If over half the world's population thought that, and everybody went along with them in over half the world's population, for example, they thought, the woman's place is to be a childbearing machine. Then, according to, as you've laid out, the sort of ethics rooted in social convenience and, I don't know, utility, then that would be the right thing to do. But I can look back or look across as an objectivist and say
But I'm
that
saying no,
that's
that would
wrong.
not be the right thing to do under that under the view of social utility. That proves out to be wrong every time. It proves out to be bad every time. This is I want to just go back to your thing with Nazi Germany, because once again I hear that kind of tossed out there almost mindlessly. Nazi Germany was not benefited by those policies. They may have seemed to benefit for a short period of time, but the rest of the world could look at that and say, you know what, that's not good. And look at what happened ultimately because of those policies. Germany went through a terrible period of rebuilding after their policies went to hell in a handbasket. So just because something seems like it's beneficial to a small group of people for some time does not say that it is actually producing the utility of social flourishing. So
Mhm.
I would say
Well,
even during the time of
I'm
Nazi Germany,
yeah.
people could objectively look at that and say, you know what, that's not actually flourishing. You're not actually flourishing,
Well,
and this is going to collapse on you, and it did.
I'm not sure I'd agree with you on that because you have to look at the historical context, right? Nazi Germany was doing well. I'll never say anything good about Nazi Germany, but they seem to be getting on fine. And the thing that brought about the collapse of Nazi Germany was not because Allied powers were trying to stop the evil that was going on. It was other things. It was military expansionism that caused the fall of the Third Reich, right? The invasion of Poland, whom Britain and France had a treaty with. And Hitler's double crossing, or the relationship that soured with Russia that caused them to have the attack on the Eastern Front. Then the USA's partnership with Britain that caused them to come into the war. So I think the evil that they were doing was shamefully not motivation for stopping them doing that evil. It was peripheral things that central but peripheral things that brought about the collapse of the Third Reich.
Well,
So
I
I'm
think
not sure I agree with you.
it suffered an inevitable fall, and I think that inevitability could be seen by people outside of that system. So I would just push back on the idea that just because a thing seems to be beneficial temporarily to some people, that it is actually creating some kind of social good. The example, for instance, of let's say an anarchy where only the strongest survive and everyone is constantly in a fight to the death, only the strongest survive. That may seem like a good idea for the strongest people. It is not. There is no point where that kind of anarchical system is good for anyone. It only feels like it's good for the person who's still alive at the moment. But pretty soon, extinction is the inevitable conclusion to that kind of system, because pretty soon there's no one left to rule. And so you don't in fact have a society. You have a society that is inevitably collapsing, even if it feels for the moment like it's a thing that's beneficial. That is not an example of utilitarian good for society. That's an example of someone having a false sense of that. And I think that people are often mistaken that things that they are doing are good when they are bad. But I think that that's where we have to kind of apply the science and the social sciences of actions and consequences to get a better idea of, is this action truly a good thing to achieve the goal of the maximum amount of flourishing for the maximum amount of people or not. And I think that is very predictable once we come to realize that is the thing that we want to achieve.
Right. Well, I will disagree about the anarchy analogy you gave, because China happens to be quite a good example of how that system works, which people can look at in their own time. But I would just want to ask you one question again, and just clarify for me about social cohesion. So what you think is that what is good is what brings about flourishing in a society?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Would you say that what you consider to be the moral thing is that which brings about flourishing for a human society globally?
Yes.
Which is cool. Would you say that's objectively true?
No.
So it's not the case that what is good is what brings about flourishing for a human society?
No, that could, in some oatmeal cookie sense, be bad. Frankly, the universe does not care. The universe would not notice if humans blew themselves off of the globe. The universe would just keep on being the universe. And so it's hard for me to think in terms of these things outside of the human societies that we're talking about. And I know that you frame things in a certain way because you believe that morality exists above and beyond the human animal. And I do not. And so once we stop talking about the well-being of humans, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. And so if morality is something other than human well-being for the maximum number of people, then I don't think I understand the concept of
Okay.
morality.
Now let me push back a bit. You said if we're not talking about humans, you don't know what we're talking about when we talk about morality. Peter Singer, the atheist philosopher, put sort of an argument together along the lines of insofar as a sentient being of any type can suffer, that is what morality addresses, and that certain animals can suffer. For example,
I agree with that.
certain animals can be sort of more capable of suffering than certain types of humans.
I
So
agree with
given
that.
so
When I say
given that
human, I'm including
so
I'm
given
including
so
other
given
animals.
so given that you would say that it'd be okay to sort of disregard certain humans in who can't suffer in favor of certain animals that can suffer.
Yes, I would.
I say that's very unsavory. So it's almost like a graded property.
Well,
A
it is a
human,
graded it is a graded property.
and that's we definitely disagree there. Then, so for example, a disabled human and a, a pretty cognizant, well-functioning higher primate. The primate has the higher status than the low-functioning uh, human.
I don't think I would put it in terms of status, but I'm a disabled human. I don't think that I would like my rights curtailed. So I
Yeah, well,
think that if we're if
it's
we're
not rights. It's the ethics of suffering,
okay,
right?
but my ethics of suffering,
Because
like I said,
because
I'm a
you and
disabled human, and so
you
I
and
believe.
Harris. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you and Harris have grounded your morality in maximizing pleasure and minimizing suffering, which is why I'm specifically talking about suffering. And you can't really say that an animal has rights in the same way that a human has rights,
But I
but
could.
the argument can be made that they can suffer. So I'm talking now a person who is unable to
A person who is unable to suffer
uh,
compared to an animal
not
that
not
is able to suffer,
yeah
I would say that.
that doesn't make any sense, but
Well, it does.
perhaps
There are plenty of humans that are unable to suffer. They're in vegetative states. I've met several.
okay, that's a
Uh,
good.
so there are they human? Sure. Taxonomically, you bet. But they cannot suffer, and they cannot experience life even at the level of a bonobo.
Mhm.
So yes, the suffering priority at that point goes to the bonobo. The human does not get special priority simply because of its DNA.
Thank you.
Uh,
I'm
yeah.
glad you said that. So what if the person is not in a vegetative state, but perhaps is functioning very minimally,
Well,
and
I
the
think that it's a
bonobo.
matter of function, right? Because once again, just so the audience has some background in this, when I was young, I went to a boarding school that housed many disabled people. And some of those people were lightly disabled, some of those people were massively disabled. And I worked for a little bit within the system of the disabled community and the institutions that deal with people of severe disabilities. And so when I say that I'm disabled, I'm what you might call a higher functioning disabled person. And there were people who in that group could have been Nobel laureates. And there were other people in that group who would never know the difference between a golf ball and an egg. So I have had a great deal of experience with people of varying degrees of disability. Now, there are people who are severely disabled who still have the capacity to suffer, say, and so they might have the mentality of, say, a puppy, but it would also be wrong to cause suffering on the puppy for no good reason too, right? So they don't lose the right to not suffer unnecessarily simply because they're massively disabled, but there is a point of disability where they don't have the capacity to suffer in the way that we're talking about, and they don't have an experience of life that allows them to know love or joy or happiness, and they are simply human DNA machines. And so that person would not, for instance, in my view, have the same uh, considerations as something that is not human, but has a much higher capacity to suffer and experience life. So I think to kind of cap that off, I definitely disagree with the Christian intuition to, and it's not just Christians, by the way, but that intuition to preference humans because they have some special DNA or some special spirit or some special other thing inside of them making them special. No, we're animals in the animal kingdom. And I think that we have to judge all animals in the same way that, we would have to judge aliens if they ever did finally land on the planet. They would clearly not be humans, but they would also be sentient. What would we do with it? And so I think the question of preferencing humans for some spiritual reason just doesn't fit in my thought process.
Which is cool, but Harris's utilitarianism that you sort of favor would flesh out with a mixture of sentient beings, humans, apes, bonobos. Like it could flesh out like that. Would you say?
Yes, this is one of the reasons I don't like to call myself a humanist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a humanist, although I think
you subscribe to Peter Singer's speciesism, which is the sort of the irrational idea of placing importance primarily or a human-centric view of the universe, of the species on this planet.
Well, right.
So basically,
I'm not human-centric. I don't, for instance, think about.
I'm saying you're not what he would call a speciesist.
Right, I am not. I judge that my dog deserves certain behavior. I mean, certain treatment, without losing the fact that taxonomically he's a canine.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't treat him like a human because he's not a human. But I don't treat other humans like canines because they're not canines.
Mm-hmm.
But both of those beings deserve, at the very least, a base level of respect and fair treatment and a chance at happiness because of their experience of life and their ability to suffer and feel pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just don't see any reason why I would break it down and say, well, this species is better than that species in that regard. Now, I think we can say some general things about biology in general and say that humans have a greater experience of life and pleasure and pain than earthworms. So I don't actually mind taking an earthworm and putting it on a hook and putting it in water and catching a bigger fish. And then taking that fish out of the water and chopping its head off and cooking it and enjoying a tasty piece of fish. I don't actually have a moral problem with any of that. And some people might say I should, but an earthworm does not have the same experience of a life as a human, nor does a fish. But on the other hand, I also don't think that it's right to allow kids to go around taking magnifying glasses and exploding bugs for pleasure. I think there's something sadistic about that. And even if the bug doesn't suffer in the way that we think of suffering, I think that because of the kind of creature we are, we should not seek to do sadistic things to other creatures, no matter what kind of creature we think they are.
Agreed. Being cruel for the sake of being cruel diminishes from the individual. Not
exactly.
So yeah, I agree, and I think the Christian story is that we should treat God's creation with respect and as well as we can, which I think includes animals.
Sure, but I think that.
But I do think that humans are. How could I put it? Humans are different to animals, and I think that we should look after humans in a special way.
Well, I think
so.
Given
the choice between looking after a disabled person and a higher functioning bonobo, I would choose the person.
Well, I think I would choose the person too, because I would not. I don't have the biological or medical or philosophical subtlety to say which deserves more. So if we're talking about a shortage of resources, in a situation where only one being can be helped, and one of the beings is a human in a vegetative state, and the other being is a healthy bonobo, or a bonobo that could be healthy and live a long social life. And we know that we can't help the human. All we can do is just extend their meat functions for such time that they give out. But that human inside their head is experiencing no life. They're doing their body can function not at all. They're simply quote unquote alive just on the basis of machines moving their body, their chest up and down. I would say put the money to the bonobo.
Hmm. I think we differ there, because I just think that given that scenario, I'd still find it very difficult to give up hope in helping the individual, and putting the money with the bonobo, as you put it. I mean, if we know, right, that human is a useless case, then that would be tough. But I just still don't think that I would be able to put the money on the bonobo at the expense of the human. I just couldn't do it.
Right. And so this is one of those places where I think the facts, how we view the facts, may view how we decide what is right and wrong. Because you believe that there's something more going on in that human than the biological functions. And I do not.
Uh-huh.
And so I am measuring biological functions and biological functions alone. And you are measuring something else that you deem mysteriously sacred.
Hmm.
And I cannot access that thing that you
Yeah,
think of
I
as
mean,
mysteriously sacred, right?
yeah.
So we have no hope of coming to an agreement on what's right and wrong in that situation, because you have a different view of the reality of the world, that humans are made up of some mysterious sacred substance and bonobos aren't. And
But
and
I did read, I did watch a philosopher, I think he's from Princeton, yesterday, and his idea is this: look, evolution or Darwinism selects for sort of the most adaptable traits. Intelligence is one. Humans are the most intelligent. Screw the rest. That's the way it goes. Every species fights for its survival. That's what Darwinism is about. Humans are the best at surviving, so uh, just live with it. Just learn to live with it. We are the apex of the biosphere that we inhabit, and that's the way it goes.
yeah, I disagree with all of those things. I mean, I disagree with the fact statements. I don't think that humans are necessarily the most intelligent, but even if we are, I don't think that intelligence equals survivability or adaptability. I think that the thing that will survive long after humans are gone are cockroaches. There are some species
Yeah,
that seem to live for.
it's a little bit counterfactual, isn't it? I mean, you can always say, "I think that will," but we're talking about what is now, and the ones that appear, according to this philosopher, to be. I try to remember
The
his name.
cockroaches have been here longer than us,
Well, we
and
could
they seem
eliminate,
to be able to survive things that we cannot.
but we could eliminate them if we wanted to.
Sure,
If
but
if the US
viruses will
if the
likely
US
eliminate us before we
if the
eliminate
US
cockroaches.
government and if the US government, the Chinese government got together and said, you know what, let's have a war on cockroaches, I think we could win it.
I don't know. I'll be honest with you. This
what
is
what that what
that's
that
an interesting
what I'm
thought experiment.
what
I don't think we could
what I'm
actually.
trying to what I'm trying to point out is that what I'm trying to point out
I
is
think
that
the cockroaches would wipe us out. They
well,
would grow strong on our bug spray.
well, I mean,
They would take us out in two
whatever way
generations.
we, I'm sure if we put the money into genetically engineering them negatively or something like that. It could be done. But the point is that we occupy a position of planetary dominance at this time. And
like the dinosaur.
Yeah, and they ruled for a while, and then according to certain Darwinian principles, they were wiped out. But they were in their rightful place at the apex of that biosphere, according to this philosopher. I'm really sorry, I can't remember his name. I'll try to remember him. Because it was, I was sort of listening to a discussion on antinatalism, and he sort of had important things to say on antinatalism.
Yeah, but I mean, look, there is a certain brutish truth to the fact that the strongest often use that strength to wipe out weaker species. There is, I think, little evidence, though, that leads to a better outcome. And so it is not, in fact, always true that the strongest wipe out lesser species. Humans aren't the only ones who have that ethic. Animals in the wild do not seek to genocide lesser species. Lions do not eat all the antelope.
Yeah, because they can't. If they would, I'm sure. If they had the ability to, I'm sure they'd try.
I don't know. I don't know if we have any evidence for that. But at any rate, we don't see any evidence of lions trying to destroy every species taxonomically below them. We don't see evidence of that in most any species. And so I'm not saying that they have some kind of poetic type of ethic that they're working off of, but it seems like nature itself demands that we have some amount of self-control in this manner. And so I don't think that humans are unique in wanting to make sure that the ecosystem is healthy so that it survives. So we do seem to have that ethic, but not all humans do. Some humans think that it's a good idea to wipe out just anything below them. I don't think we're different from animals.
I'm a little bit sort of, if you could wind back a bit so that you can help me. What were you saying about lions and genocide?
Yeah, lions. There's no evidence that lions are on some mission to destroy all creatures that are not as strong as lions.
So, may I ask how that relates to what we were saying before?
Oh, well, I was just commenting. I was just responding to your comment about the person who was suggesting that the evolutionary drive seems to be to dominate over everything else, and that somehow because humans are at the top of the food chain, that we should merely dominate, and that should be some kind of atheist ethic. It's not. It's not.
Well,
I
didn't say it was an atheist ethic. I said it's sort of an outworking of Darwinism.
But it's not an outworking of Darwinism. This is what I'm saying. I mean, if the animal kingdom well understood, you would see that that's simply not how any species behaves. And you might say, well, but that seems like how it should behave. But then, I'm arguing against.
When you say it's not how a species, when you say it's not how a species behaves, flesh that out a little bit.
Well, can you give me an example besides humans who behave that way?
Behave in what way?
In a way that requires that they dominate over all species, so that lesser species suffer as a result of it.
Well, I don't think that they I don't think that they dominate so lesser species suffer. They just dominate to achieve their ends. So a lion eats as much as it can eat and feeds its family as much as it can. In that sense, it's very happy to dominate. Dominate the surround, to be the apex predator on the savannah.
Well, okay, but I think that's just the outworking of all carnivorous creatures. You know,
Mhm.
we
Which
eat
is the
food
point.
that we
That
can
yeah,
catch,
which is the
but
point. Each is
but the
trying
thing
to
is,
dominate.
we could all eat more. I mean, the idea that lions couldn't eat more, I don't, I'm not sure that that's true. I mean, we could all eat
Well,
more,
what I'm
kill
what
more,
I'm what
destroy
I'm
more.
what I'm trying to say is that its actions are not governed by moral considerations. I
But
think
ours
they
aren't
are.
either in that
Yeah,
sense.
I think they're governed by instincts, and those instincts are to eat as much as they can, procreate as much as they can, right? And in that sense, they will try to dominate their their environment. Sure, there will be checks and balances that sort of inhibit how successful that is, but I think that's all that from a macro point of view, from the outside looking in, that's all they do. That's all their programming does is try to dominate. Same with wolves, same with black widow spiders, same with elapids such as cobras. I think that that's what they do. They try to dominate, control, and be the apex predator or predominant species in whatever environment they find themselves. And what the philosopher was saying, well, that's the way nature is, and that's the way humans should be, ought to be. And we need not be too distraught about that, but just take advantage of those things that nature has given us to dominate or control the surroundings in which we find ourselves.
I don't think we are that much different from other large social apes. So, I mean, they also have societies, and you can say, well, they don't have an ethic, but they also, they also don't uh, overeat their environment, and they create social situations where their families can thrive and their children can thrive and create families, and that ecosystem can continue. And you can say, well, that's just their programming. I don't see how you're saying why the human does that for different reasons. I mean, we behave pretty much the same way in that sense.
We behave the same way in what sense?
Well,
We
we behave the same way as other large primates.
But we don't. For
Wh-
example, I believe
how do we not?
I believe gorillas and bonobos are sexually dimorphic, which means that one male, or the dominant male, has a harem which the other males are not allowed to intrude upon. So it's a
And that's
very
different
different.
from humans. How?
Yeah, I don't know anybody that would beat another man because he's having an affair with his chosen target. I don't mix with people like that. You know,
Okay, but
who are
you seem to be
sexually
denying that
dimorphic.
strong human males have sex with as many females as they can get away with.
Agreed.
And that's
Agreed.
true whether they're married or not. We are very, very sexually dimorphic in that sense. We try to force a kind of a different type of sexual ethic on ourselves because we think that it comes from the outside and that we should be a certain way. But it's proven again and again and again that we are not that. Divorces end at a rate of about
Okay,
50%.
but apes live in. I think gorillas live in societies in which the weaker males don't get any. Only the big males get some, and that's the point. That's why where the sexual dimorphism plays out in a way that is not analogous to human societies. That's the point that I was making.
Sure, and I suspect, though, in a small enough um, community, if someone was strong enough to do that, they would
Yeah.
do that. I don't think that is not a human trait. I think that it is simply not practical to
Okay.
do. I think that we have tried all kinds of things like that.
Okay.
Human societies don't survive well that way.
Yeah, I can imagine it, but yeah.
Yeah, our ethic is not
Disagree on that.
better in that sense. Our societies are bigger though, and so there are certain things that are simply not practical. But we've tried it. We've tried all of those things. It just turns out that either that ends in war or your society ends up being beaten out by other societies that perform better. And so evolution requires that we behave in certain ways. But I don't think that you can rack that up to, oh, but we have a greater ethic. So can we take a moment and I want to double back before I go forward just one more. I know that we've gone long here, but you were talking about killing babies for fun. We can change that narrative to something like homosexuality, because that's something that we do at a fairly predictable rate, and it's something that we can talk about as a real thing as opposed to a hypothetical thing. So this is not an attempt to get you in trouble with a constituency. It's a matter of trying to talk about this thing with real examples that we can wrap our minds around. So one of the places where our ethic cashes out, well, might cash out differently. As I wrote, I have not asked you before this moment what your opinion is, and I'm sure you've talked about it on the board, and I don't know what it is. So I see no wrong at all with the practice of homosexuality. And I'm guessing that you do. And so, even if I were to believe that ethics flow from God, I don't know how that would give me the position that homosexuality is wrong. And one of the reasons I say that is because these days, and I've looked at a number of statistics, as many as I can, the majority, it's a small majority, something like 57% Christians, just Christians, taking out the filthy atheists out of it, believe that homosexuality is okay. And it is, in fact, not a sin, and that it should not be regulated in any way. So this is the Christian thought on homosexuality now, and that's different from what it used to be. It's changed rather rapidly, but the fact of the matter is, if I were to just survey Christians and just accept that morality comes from God, how would I come to the right answer on homosexuality? What method do I use to get there?
Kind of not tracking with you there. Do you mean how does the Christian determine that homosexuality is wrong?
Well, yes, the Christians that
If they do,
right.
I think if they think it's wrong, then they would have to determine that the Bible is the word of God and that it's authoritative in what it says, and that there's an injunction against homosexuality in that word of God that is applicable to this day, and that contravening what that word says is a contravention of a moral code that ought not to be contravened. That's how you'd get there.
So you're saying it's wrong because there's a book that says it's wrong.
No, you're asking me why I think it's wrong. I think that I think that is one way of arriving at it. I think that
Right. Well, so before you go, though, even if I accepted that answer, the Christians who do believe in that Bible disagree.
Let me give my opinion on it, so you can know where I'm coming from.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that reading it classed as prohibited. Yeah, and you were going to say.
Well, so even if I accepted this way of coming about the right thing,
Yeah.
Christians disagree on that because the people that I'm talking about in these surveys believe that the Bible is inspired in some way. And so they do accept it as the Word of God, and they're just reading it differently than you. And there are more of them reading the Bible who seem to come to the conclusion that it's okay, as opposed to those who still think it's wrong. So it seems to me that if I'm using the Bible, as the method of determining right and wrong, I am still confused about how to determine what's right and wrong. It's not simply enough to say, well, it's in that book over there, because different people reading the book have different ideas about it, and so you don't actually come out with an assurance of what is right and wrong.
Yeah, I mean, just because people don't agree on what something says doesn't mean that that thing doesn't say something,
Well,
right?
I'm not saying that it
Yeah,
doesn't say something, but it doesn't help you determine what's right or wrong if you can't absolutely know what that thing is saying. And it seems
well,
like that is the case.
first you can't absolutely know anything. Even in science, you can't absolutely know anything, right? But if you're asking me, I think that what I mentioned was that I'm a virtue ethicist, and I think that we are designed, or we do have an essence, and sort of there's a way we are, and there's a way we should be.
Mhm.
Bridging the way we are to the way we should be is what morality is. It's what it's aiming towards. Now, since we are designed in a specific way, I would say that contravening that design is not living a life in the way that we should be. And there is a way that we should be that is determined by our physical structure as well as our intellectual makeup. So I would also say that that is part of the right way to act, or the good way to act, should I say.
So you're saying that heterosexuality is how humans are designed, and that seems to be contradicted by, the 5 to 10% of humans that are homosexual. And by the way, before you say, oh, well, those are just people who prefer this, you also see that same ratio roughly in other animals. And so it does seem to be a natural thing. I don't see how you could say, well,
Well,
it's
I,
designed
I
in
just
animals.
I just flatly disagree. I don't think, for one thing, that we can see that in other animals. Um,
You
to
don't?
know that to know that they're homosexual, you'd have to know things about the disposition of their conscious states of being, right? That they
How
prefer
do you define
that they
homosexual?
that they prefer that they prefer male horses, for example, to female horses for whatever reasons, right? Now, how could you ever know that about an animal other than knowing that? Well, I think, yeah, what we can see is that this animal is mistaken, or has too much sort of sexual hormones or something like that. You could never, so far, I think, scientifically come up with a chart that says this species 5% prefer males because they just do.
Yeah, I'm
So
I'm
to crystallize that, I'm trying to
okay.
say that's a comment about the disposition, the conscious disposition of sentient beings, some of which are not that sentient compared to us, or is that the right word? Not that higher functioning compared to us, and that's just something that even in principle is just unknown given
Yeah,
current.
I'm not sure that I care about their psychology here because
But that's surely
as I
there's
speak of homosexuality, I'm
surely
speaking of
psychology.
behavior.
Yeah, surely psychology is what it's about, because isn't it the psychology that determines behavior,
No,
right?
it's about
That
desire.
and that yeah, which is
It's an
governed,
emotion.
which is
It's not that high of an
which is
emotion.
governed by psychology. That's the
Oh,
point, and
well,
that's
but
the point. That's the point the trans is going to make, right? The trans is going to make the point that you're born in a body, which is a sexual, physical attribute, but gender is a social construct which doesn't fit with their psychology.
okay, but it's not a particularly high order thought process that we're talking about. We're just talking about desire. some people,
How high the thought process is I'm not privy to say that. I just don't know.
yeah, I think it's a fairly low level, almost at the level of instinctual process.
I
And
can't say. I just don't know. I can't comment on that. I don't know. You know.
but we can certainly comment on the behavior. So
But the
if you
behavior is determined by the psychology. That's the
no, the
point.
behavior is determined by the behavior. The
But
behavior.
it cannot. Behavior is to say you do things, and there are reasons why you do things. If you have a reason, you do the thing. You don't just do the thing and do the thing, which is, a tautology.
So I'm honestly trying to understand. And I'm not sure.
Message. Have you seen the message?
Right. So let me do this. We have the beginnings of a discussion. This is a discussion that properly done should be done over the course of weeks, months, lifetimes.
Uh-huh.
And so, can I suggest that we come back to the arena, pick up some of these topics plus some more that are left on the cutting room floor,
I would love to do that.
and bring a friend or two.
I think that's a great idea.
And your list of friends that you can bring are wide open. There's no one that you could invite that I would not want to talk to.
Okay.
Okay, so that is it for our episode here. So I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Hopefully Marvin will be back with David to do part 2 on that discussion. But yeah, have a great week, everyone. Bye bye.